Anna White was not the kind of woman who disappeared without a trace. At 29 years old, she was vibrant, careful, and meticulous. Her friends described her as someone who double-checked door locks, backed up every file on her laptop, and carried 2 different flashlights in her car, just in case. She was the planner in the group, the one who never forgot sunscreen on a cloudy day or bottled water on a short walk. That was why her disappearance made no sense at all. The last time anyone saw Anna was on a clear Friday morning in Portland. Her roommate, Lisa, remembered the moment vividly. Anna was standing in their small kitchen, pouring coffee into a stainless steel thermos, dressed in hiking clothes, gray jacket, green cargo pants, and her sturdy brown boots. Her backpack leaned against the chair, neatly packed. "Where are you headed today?" Lisa asked. "Mount Hood," Anna replied casually. "I want to get some air, clear my head." Lisa frowned. "Alone?" Anna smiled, as if she had heard the question too many times before. "I'll be fine. I need this." That was the end of it, or so it seemed. What Lisa didn't know was that just 30 minutes before, Anna had received a phone call. The call was short, only 58 seconds long, but it rattled her. Neighbors would later recall seeing Anna step outside onto the porch, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her expression dark and tense. She paced quickly, shook her head once, and whispered something they couldn't make out. Then she ended the call, walked back inside, and pretended nothing had happened. By 9 a.m., Anna's car, a silver Subaru, was parked at a popular trailhead near the Columbia River Gorge. Hikers that day remembered seeing it. Some even claimed they saw a young woman in a gray jacket set off down the trail with a determined stride. But after that, Anna seemed to vanish into the thick wilderness as though swallowed by the forest itself. When she failed to return that evening, Lisa wasn't worried at first. Anna was known to stretch her hikes longer than expected. But by the next morning, worry turned to dread. Her phone went straight to voicemail. No texts, no updates. And when Anna missed a dinner she had planned with her parents, something she had never once done in her life, alarms went off. The police were called. By Sunday morning, Anna's Subaru was found exactly where she left it. The doors were locked. The keys were inside, tucked neatly in the cup holder. Her wallet and ID sat in the glove box. Oddly, her phone was not there. Nor was her backpack. That discovery raised more questions than answers. Why would she leave her keys inside? Why lock the car? And why take her phone but vanish so completely? Then came the detail that turned Anna's case from a tragic missing hiker story into something far more sinister. For days into the search, a group of volunteers stumbled across something in a patch of moss and pine needles several miles from the trailhead. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a dirty piece of clothing. But as one man bent down, his blood ran cold. It was a boot. A woman's hiking boot. The boot was caked in mud, its laces snapped as though pulled hard. The tread had been worn but not destroyed, and inside, there were smudges of what looked like dried blood. Investigators quickly identified it as Anna's. But it wasn't the blood that shook everyone. Inside the boot, tucked tightly into the toe, was a folded piece of paper. When police carefully opened it, they found a few lines of handwriting, but it wasn't Anna's neat, looping script. It was sharp, uneven, almost rushed. The words read, "She shouldn't have come here." The public wasn't told this immediately. At first, the discovery of the boot was reported as nothing more than an important clue. But rumors leaked quickly. One volunteer swore he had seen the paper himself before officials sealed it away. Another claimed the note had more written on it, something darker, something about betrayal. Whatever the truth, the boot became the center of the case. Why was only one found? Where was the other? And who had written that message? Theories began to swirl online. Some said Anna had been chased, perhaps even attacked, and that the boot was torn off in a struggle. Others argued she had left it as a deliberate sign, proof she had been with someone. And then there were those who believed the note meant she was alive, and that she had been silenced, maybe taken by force. Lisa, her roommate, was adamant. Anna would never just leave her boot behind. Never. Something happened to her out there. And someone knows what it was. Detectives pressed forward, but from the beginning, their investigation carried an odd silence, as though someone above them wanted the case handled gently. Reporters questioned why the note wasn't released to the public. Officials claimed it was irrelevant and unverified. But whispers in Portland grew louder. Why hide something unless it threatened someone? And so, Anna's story began, not just as a missing person, but as the center of a mystery that would spiral into scandal, suspicion, and conspiracy. By the end of that week, one chilling fact became clear: Anna White had walked into the wilderness. She never returned. And her boot, with its cryptic message, was the only thing she left behind. The Cascade Mountains had always carried a dual reputation. For many, they were a sanctuary of fresh air, towering trees, and breathtaking views. But for those who had spent real time among their ridges and valleys, the Cascades were something else entirely: unpredictable, merciless, and unforgiving. The Columbia River Gorge, in particular, was a maze of sheer cliffs, roaring waterfalls, and hidden paths where even experienced hikers could vanish within minutes. This was where Anna White had chosen to hike. The trail she parked near that Friday morning wound toward Mount Hood, a snow-capped giant looming like a silent guardian over Portland. It was a popular hiking destination, especially in spring. Families came for the waterfalls, couples came for the romantic overlooks, and thrill-seekers came for the challenge of scaling the harder routes. But Anna's choice was puzzling. She wasn't known as an avid hiker. Yes, she enjoyed nature walks, but friends later admitted she was nervous about going off marked trails. She had once laughed off an invitation to camp overnight in the gorge. "I like my bed too much," she joked. Yet, here she was, venturing into one of the more rugged areas, alone. The police would later confirm that her car was parked at the Wakena Falls trailhead, a gateway that connected to a sprawling network of paths. Some wound toward family-friendly picnic areas. Others led deep into the wilderness, where cell service dropped and the terrain grew treacherous. Witnesses came forward. A couple hiking that morning remembered passing a young woman matching Anna's description. She looked determined, the husband recalled. Not like a tourist. Like someone who knew where she was going. But the wife added something stranger: she was walking fast. Almost too fast. Like she was late for something, or trying to catch up to someone. Another hiker swore he saw a woman running barefoot along a narrow path later that same afternoon. At the time, he thought it was bizarre, but people did strange things in the gorge. Only when the news broke about Anna's missing boot did the memory chill him to the bone. The wilderness itself became an unspoken suspect. Search and rescue volunteers spoke about how deceptive the gorge could be. A trail could seem simple, then split without warning into dangerous switchbacks. Rivers surged with icy water that could sweep away even the strongest swimmer. And then there were the cliffs, hidden by foliage, often just feet away from the path. One slip, one wrong step, and a person could fall hundreds of feet, swallowed by trees and rocks below. Yet, despite those dangers, search teams scoured the area extensively. They expected to find at least some trace of Anna if she had simply fallen or gotten lost: a torn piece of clothing, her backpack, her phone, anything. But for days, there was nothing. And then came the boot. When investigators announced the discovery, they subtly framed it as a sign of an accident. "It's possible the boot was lost in a fall," one officer said at a press briefing. But privately, even the searchers doubted it. The boot wasn't resting beneath a cliff. It wasn't lying near a riverbank. It was in a flat, wooded section of the gorge where there were no obvious dangers. More troubling was the paper note stuffed inside. Though police downplayed its importance, the public was not fooled. Everyone who had heard whispers about it demanded to know: if it was irrelevant, why not release it? Why seal it away so quickly? By the second week of the search, theories multiplied. Some believed Anna had staged her own disappearance. That she had carefully parked her car, locked her keys inside, and left her boot behind as part of some plan to vanish from her life. She was smart enough to do it, one coworker said during an interview. If anyone could disappear on purpose, it was Anna. Others believed something darker. That Anna had arranged to meet someone in the gorge and it had gone wrong. Her hurried walk, her tense phone call before leaving, these weren't signs of a woman seeking peace in nature. They were signs of someone rushing toward a secret encounter. There was even a rumor, controversial, whispered, but persistent, that Anna had mentioned being followed in the weeks before her disappearance. A barista at her regular cafe swore she once told him she felt eyes on her during her evening jogs. The wilderness suddenly seemed less like the backdrop of a hiking accident and more like the perfect stage for a planned disappearance or even a crime. Meanwhile, Anna's family was growing desperate. Her father, David White, stood in front of cameras and begged for help. His voice cracked as he said, "My daughter would not just walk away. She would not leave us like this. Someone out there knows what happened." The press latched onto his plea, and soon, Anna's case was not just local news. It hit national headlines. But as coverage expanded, so did the tension. On one side were those who sympathized with the family, convinced Anna had been the victim of foul play. On the other were skeptics who pointed out inconsistencies. Why hike alone if she feared being watched? Why choose one of the most complex trail networks? And why leave her car in such a deliberate, almost staged manner? Everywhere, the wilderness loomed in the background. The gorge was no stranger to disappearances. People had vanished there before, some turning up months later, some never at all. But there was something different about Anna's case. The boot. The note. The secrecy. By the end of the second week, whispers had turned into accusations. Some online commentators speculated the police were deliberately withholding information. Others accused the search teams of being sloppy or even complicit. And then, quietly, a more controversial idea began to spread, that Anna hadn't gone missing by accident at all. That she had stumbled into something bigger than herself. It was a theory that would gain frightening traction when more of her secrets began to surface. For now, though, all the world knew was this: Anna White walked into the wilderness of Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge. She walked fast, she walked alone, and she never walked out again. When the search team brought the mud-caked boot back from the gorge, no one expected it to become the centerpiece of the investigation. At first glance, it was simply a lost shoe, the kind of thing hikers misplace or discard when injured. But as forensic analysts examined it, the story it told was far stranger than anyone could have imagined. The boot was definitely Anna's. Lisa, her roommate, confirmed it immediately. She loved those boots, she said. They were expensive, sturdy. She wore them on every hike. Anna wasn't careless, she wouldn't just lose one. The condition of the boot raised more questions than it answered. The leather was scratched as though dragged across rocks. The laces were snapped, not frayed. The sole was coated in dried mud, but there was no sign of long-term exposure, no mold, no animal chewing, nothing to suggest it had been out there for weeks. It looked as if it had been placed recently. And then there was the blood. At first, police didn't confirm it publicly. They described the stain as unidentified residue. But whispers leaked. Volunteers who claimed to have seen the boot before it was bagged swore it was clearly blood. Later, when pressured by reporters, police admitted that testing revealed traces of Anna's DNA inside the boot. That revelation shocked no one. Of course she would bleed if she had been injured. What shocked everyone was the second result: there was another DNA profile mixed in. A man's. And then came the note. Folded tightly and pushed deep into the toe of the boot, the note was written in a hurried scrawl. 3 short sentences. She shouldn't have come here. He warned her. Now it's too late. The handwriting was not Anna's. Her journals, recovered from her apartment, showed smooth loops and tidy cursive. This writing was jagged, slanted, almost panicked. Investigators refused to release scans of the note, claiming it was part of ongoing evidence. But by then, it didn't matter. Enough details had leaked to ignite a storm. The public was outraged. Why hadn't the note been disclosed immediately? Who was he? And why was the message stuffed into Anna's own boot? Online forums exploded with theories. Some believed Anna had been stalked and the boot was a chilling signature left behind by her abductor. Others speculated the note was a hoax planted to confuse investigators. But the most controversial theory was darker, that law enforcement already knew who he was and were deliberately protecting him. Meanwhile, Anna's family was kept in the dark. Her father, David, grew furious during a press conference. How dare they sit on evidence while my daughter is out there? We demand transparency. We demand answers. But answers never came. Instead, strange inconsistencies surfaced. One search volunteer recalled being pulled aside after the boot was found. He was told firmly not to discuss what he had seen. They said it would compromise the investigation, he later told a journalist. But it felt more like they were hiding something. Even stranger was the location of the boot. It was found on flat ground, in a wooded patch well off the main trail, as though deliberately placed there. Dogs trained to follow Anna's scent had passed through the area days earlier, and found nothing. How had the boot appeared suddenly in a place already searched? Some suspected the boot had been planted. The media seized on this theory. Headlines screamed about evidence manipulation and a case of cover-up in Portland. Officials dismissed these as sensationalism, but their silence on the note only fueled speculation. Lisa, Anna's roommate, grew increasingly vocal. She insisted Anna had confided in her weeks before the disappearance about a man she couldn't name. She was afraid of him, Lisa said. She told me, if anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. I thought she was exaggerating. Now I know she wasn't. The boot became a symbol. Candlelight vigils were held where supporters placed boots in a circle around photographs of Anna, demanding justice. Protesters marched in Portland holding signs that read, "Who is he?" Theories spiraled into scandal. Some pointed fingers at Mark Jensen, a married businessman rumored to have been romantically involved with Anna. He was wealthy, well-connected, and had enough influence to make evidence disappear. He denied everything. I hardly knew her, he told reporters, but phone records later revealed multiple late-night calls between him and Anna in the weeks before her disappearance. Others accused the police of botching the case intentionally. Portland had faced criticism before for mishandling missing person cases, especially those involving women. Was Anna's case just another statistic they wanted buried? The most controversial theory came from a retired detective, speaking anonymously to a local newspaper. He claimed the note was more than just a warning. It was written by someone panicked, he said. Someone who wanted the world to know she didn't vanish by accident. That's why it was hidden in the boot. Because they knew the police couldn't ignore it forever. But if that were true, why not leave the note somewhere obvious? Why hide it where it might never be found? Unless, of course, the person who wrote it didn't want the world to know yet. The mystery deepened further when handwriting experts were brought in. They couldn't match the script to anyone in Anna's life. It wasn't Mark Jensen's. It wasn't Anna's ex-boyfriend's. It wasn't her father's, her brother's, or even her co-workers. It belonged to someone completely unknown. By the end of the month, the boot had transformed Anna's case from a missing person tragedy into a full-blown scandal. The public was demanding answers. Journalists were digging into her private life. And whispers about corruption and cover-ups grew louder. All because of one mud-soaked boot, a trace of blood, and a note that seemed to scream. She didn't just disappear. Someone made her disappear. But who? And why? The next revelations would make the boot seem almost ordinary in comparison. Because as reporters began uncovering Anna's secrets, it became clear she had been living a double life, one that might explain exactly why she had never come back from the wilderness. When Anna's face appeared on every news channel, smiling in photos taken at weddings, birthday parties, and family dinners, she looked like the picture of stability. A responsible young woman, close to her family, with steady work and loyal friends. But behind that carefully curated image, cracks were beginning to show. It started with whispers. First from her coworkers at the real estate firm where she worked as an assistant. They described her as kind, diligent, but also distracted in the weeks before she vanished. She would stay late in the office, but not working, one colleague said. She'd be pacing, whispering on the phone. Sometimes she'd cry. We didn't want to pry, but it was obvious something was wrong. Then came the revelation that Anna had been involved with a man named Mark Jensen, a married businessman nearly 20 years older than her. Mark was no ordinary man. He was a wealthy property developer in Portland with connections to city officials. His company had been accused of shady land deals before, though nothing had ever stuck. At first, Mark denied knowing Anna beyond a professional acquaintance. But when reporters uncovered phone records showing dozens of late-night calls between them, he changed his story. We were friends, he admitted. Yes, we spoke often. But she was troubled. I was trying to help her. It didn't take long for Anna's friends to speak up. Lisa, her roommate, went on record. Anna told me she was in love with him. She wanted him to leave his wife. She said he promised he would, but he never did. The public was scandalized. What had seemed like a tragic disappearance now looked tangled in forbidden romance and betrayal. The media branded Anna, the other woman, while Mark, with his polished suits and slick interviews, cast himself as the victim of gossip. But there was more. Anna's journals, seized from her apartment, revealed cryptic entries in the weeks before she vanished. He says it's dangerous if I talk. I know too much. I shouldn't have gone through his files. If something happens, it won't be an accident. The handwriting was undeniably hers. What files had she found? And who was he? Mark, once again, became the prime suspect in the court of public opinion. But he wasn't the only man in Anna's orbit. Another name surfaced, David Miller, her ex-boyfriend, who had broken up with her 6 months earlier. David had been vocal about resenting her new lifestyle, complaining that she had changed after meeting powerful people. When police questioned him, David admitted to arguing with Anna a week before she vanished. I told her she was playing with fire, he said. She thought she was invincible. She wasn't. The scandal only deepened when Lisa revealed that Anna had recently confided in her about being followed. She thought it was Mark's people, Lisa said. She told me if she disappeared, Mark would know why. Mark, of course, denied everything. Ridiculous, he told the press. I had nothing to do with Anna's disappearance. I never hurt her. I cared for her. But questions swirled. Why had Anna been so afraid? And what exactly had she discovered that made her believe she was in danger? Investigators quietly pursued the angle of corruption. Rumors spread that Anna had stumbled onto documents involving illegal land acquisitions, documents tied directly to Mark's business empire. If true, she would have been a liability. But there was another, even more explosive rumor, that Anna had been pregnant. An anonymous tipster claimed she had confided in a friend that she was expecting a child and that the father was a man who couldn't be named. No medical records were found to prove it, but the idea was enough to ignite a firestorm. If Anna had truly been carrying Mark's child, it would have given her tremendous leverage over him, and a powerful motive for someone to silence her. By this point, the public was bitterly divided. Some blamed Anna, painting her as reckless and manipulative, suggesting she staged her disappearance to force Mark's hand. Others saw her as a young woman betrayed and silenced by powerful men who feared what she knew. Meanwhile, strange inconsistencies kept surfacing. Her laptop, recovered from her bedroom, had its hard drive wiped clean. No one could explain who had done it. Neighbors recalled seeing an unfamiliar black SUV parked near her apartment days before she left for the gorge. And the mysterious phone call she received the morning she vanished, the one that rattled her so visibly, remained untraced. The boot, the note, the blood, all of it pointed toward foul play. But the question now wasn't just what happened to Anna. It was why. And the deeper investigators looked, the more it seemed that Anna hadn't just been a victim of a random tragedy in the wilderness. She had been a woman living a dangerous double life, entangled in forbidden love, whispers of corruption, and secrets that might have been worth killing for. By the end of the month, the public's image of Anna had transformed. She was no longer the smiling young woman in the missing posters. She was a lightning rod for scandal, her story a battlefield of theories and accusations. And still, no one could answer the most haunting question. If Anna had truly known too much, what exactly was the secret she had stumbled upon, and who had the most to lose if she told the truth? The boot had started the mystery. But Anna's double life was about to turn the case from scandal into something even more dangerous, a battle for survival between truth and power. From the very first day, the search for Anna White should have been straightforward. She had parked her car at a known trailhead. There was a clear starting point. The Columbia River Gorge had been combed countless times before for lost hikers, and with helicopters, tracking dogs, drones, and volunteers, rescuers usually found something, even if it was only a clue. But Anna's search defied logic. At first, it seemed promising. Helicopters circled overhead, search and rescue dogs scoured the ground, and dozens of volunteers spread through the gorge calling her name. But within days, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. The dogs, normally reliable, kept losing Anna's scent abruptly. One handler described it as like she vanished into thin air. The trail started strong near her parked Subaru, but then ended suddenly less than a mile in, with no gradual fade. It was as if she stepped off the earth, another rescuer said. Worse, certain areas were inexplicably left untouched. Volunteers asked why they couldn't search specific side trails that branched toward private lands or abandoned cabins. They were told those zones were off-limits. No explanation. Just orders. That secrecy infuriated Anna's father, David. "How can you call this a full search if you're deliberately avoiding areas?" he demanded at a press conference. Officials shrugged off his accusations, claiming resources needed to be focused strategically. But to many, it sounded like an excuse. Meanwhile, small, unsettling details emerged from those who had been on the ground. One volunteer remembered stumbling upon a shredded piece of fabric near a riverbank. He swore it looked like part of a jacket sleeve. When he turned it in, investigators brushed it off as unrelated without testing. Another claimed he saw footprints, bare footprints, in the mud near the path where Anna's boot had been found. Again, dismissed. The boot itself raised further suspicion. If it had been dropped during a struggle, why hadn't search dogs detected it earlier? Why did it appear days after the area had already been combed? Some volunteers began whispering among themselves, maybe the boot hadn't been lost at all. Maybe it had been placed. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the search was called off. Barely 3 weeks after Anna vanished, officials announced they were scaling back operations. The reason? Lack of evidence. To the White family, it was a slap in the face. They gave up on her, David fumed. They want this to go away. The decision sparked outrage. Hundreds of Portlanders who had followed the case gathered outside City Hall holding signs, "Keep searching. Where is Anna? No cover UPS." Theories multiplied. Some believed officials were simply incompetent. Others believed they were protecting someone. Online commentators accused law enforcement of shielding Mark Jensen, the married businessman linked to Anna. One viral post read, "If the search keeps avoiding certain areas, maybe those areas are exactly where we should be looking." And then came the most controversial claim of all. An anonymous rescue worker contacted a local newspaper and alleged that their team had been instructed not to search around one particular section of the gorge, a privately owned property tied to one of Mark Jensen's development companies. "We were told to stay away, no explanation," the whistleblower said. But it didn't make sense. That property was right in line with the path she would have taken. The article exploded like a bombshell. Suddenly, the story wasn't about a missing woman, it was about possible corruption. Why would a businessman with ties to city officials have his property shielded from search teams during an active investigation? Mark denied everything. He claimed he had nothing to hide and even offered a carefully staged tour of one of his nearby properties for reporters. But something about his performance rang hollow. He walked briskly through manicured areas, avoiding the deeper, wilder stretches of land. When a reporter asked if searchers could return there with dogs, his answer was vague: the authorities already did their job. Meanwhile, locals began their own searches. Amateur hikers and YouTubers trekked through the off-limits zones with cameras, documenting every strange discovery. They found empty fire pits, discarded clothing, and even rusted-out storage sheds filled with old tools. Nothing definitively tied to Anna, but enough to raise eyebrows. The more the official search pulled back, the more ordinary citizens pushed forward. And with every video uploaded online, public suspicion of a cover-up grew. Even the way authorities handled the blood evidence on the boot came under fire. Weeks after its discovery, no update was given on the unidentified male DNA. "We're still testing," police claimed. But experts scoffed. DNA results don't take weeks unless something is being concealed. The case was beginning to look less like a tragedy and more like a scandal in the making. David White put it plainly during another interview: if Anna were from a rich family, if she had influence, this search wouldn't have ended so soon. "My daughter didn't just walk away. And someone out there knows what happened to her." The audience watching from across the country couldn't look away. Theories spiraled, each one more disturbing than the last. Some claimed Anna was being held somewhere alive, hidden deliberately. Others feared she had been silenced for stumbling onto something bigger: corruption, crime, secrets that were never meant to be exposed. One online commentator summed up the growing sentiment: the search wasn't meant to find Anna. It was meant to make us stop looking. By the end of the 5th week, the official search for Anna White was over. But for her family, her friends, and the thousands following her case online, the real search was just beginning. Because if the boot was a message, if the note inside was a warning, then Anna hadn't simply gone missing in the wilderness. She had been erased, and the people responsible were powerful enough to make sure no one asked too many questions. But the truth had a way of clawing its way back to the surface. And soon, attention would shift to a man who kept showing up in whispers, sightings, and rumors, a man who always seemed one step away from the shadows. The man in the shadows. For weeks, the name Mark Jensen floated at the edge of the investigation like a ghost. He was never officially called a suspect, never charged with anything, but he hovered over every conversation about Anna White's disappearance. When her boot was found, people whispered his name. When the search was cut short, people shouted it. But who exactly was Mark Jensen? To the public, he was a polished real estate developer with a reputation for turning struggling neighborhoods into revitalized communities. To those who worked under him, he was ruthless, ambitious, and not above bending the rules when money was at stake. And to Anna, he was something far more complicated. Mark had been married for 22 years to his wife, Carol, a woman who rarely appeared in public. But his private life was more tangled. Anna wasn't the first woman rumored to be romantically linked to him. Bartenders, assistants, even an intern once whispered of late-night meetings, expensive gifts, and sudden silences when confronted. Nothing was ever proven, but the smoke was always there, and now, with Anna gone, people wondered if the fire was finally showing. The whispers about Mark grew louder when a gas station attendant came forward. He claimed that on the very morning Anna vanished, Mark stopped by his station just outside Portland. Surveillance footage showed him clearly, buying bottled water, trail mix, and an odd assortment of camping supplies, a flashlight, rope, and gloves. At the time, no one thought much of it. But when Anna's boot surfaced days later, the coincidence seemed chilling. Why would a businessman in a tailored suit need camping gear on the same day Anna set out on her hike? Mark's explanation was unconvincing. "I was preparing for a family trip," he told reporters. Completely unrelated. The timing is unfortunate. But no one recalled ever seeing him camping with his family. More damning were the sightings. Several hikers reported seeing a man resembling Mark near the same trail Anna had taken that morning. One described him as wearing a baseball cap pulled low, as if trying to avoid recognition. Another remembered him because of his shoes, polished leather loafers, completely inappropriate for rugged terrain. The reports were inconsistent, easy for skeptics to dismiss. But taken together, they painted a troubling picture. Mark Jensen might have been in the gorge that day. When asked directly, he scoffed. "Absurd. I was at my office all morning." But investigators quietly admitted his alibi was shaky. His assistant confirmed seeing him at work later in the day, but not during the crucial hours when Anna began her hike. Then came the biggest revelation. The DNA found inside Anna's boot, the male DNA mixed with her blood, did not match Mark directly. But it didn't clear him either. Analysts described it as partial, degraded. Still, internet sleuths latched onto the coincidence. If it wasn't Mark, then who? Someone working for him? Because by then, another rumor had surfaced: Mark had more than business connections. He had political ones. City officials had greenlit questionable land purchases in his favor. Inspectors who raised concerns about his building projects were mysteriously reassigned. And now, some whispered, the police themselves were protecting him. The deeper journalists dug, the stranger things became. One reporter discovered that Mark's company owned a small, undeveloped property just miles from where Anna's boot was found. The land was dense with trees, accessible only by dirt roads. When the reporter asked to visit, he was refused, told the land was unsafe. Locals, however, said they'd seen black SUVs driving in and out of that property late at night. One even swore he heard a woman scream echoing from the trees weeks after Anna vanished. It was a horrifying claim, and impossible to prove. But it made people wonder, had Anna ever left the gorge at all? Or had she been hidden somewhere in plain sight, on land controlled by the very man she feared? Meanwhile, Anna's journals loomed large over the story. One entry stood out. He says no one would believe me. He says the city is his. If I speak, I'll regret it. To the public, he had a name now. Mark Jensen. But why would Anna risk getting involved with a man like him? Lisa, her roommate, offered one explanation. She thought she could change him. She thought she mattered to him. And when she realized she didn't, she got angry. She wanted the world to know what kind of man he really was. It was a dangerous decision, and perhaps a fatal one. Mark, for his part, remained defiant. He gave interviews, smiling politely, brushing off accusations. But cracks showed in his composure. When one reporter asked if he had ever threatened Anna, his jaw tightened and his voice sharpened. Absolutely not. I never threatened anyone. Don't twist this into something it's not. But behind the polished mask, rumors swirled. Former employees began speaking anonymously. One claimed Mark had once said, "People who get in my way disappear." Another swore he saw a black duffel bag in Mark's office weeks before Anna vanished, stuffed with cash, as though prepared for a quick escape. The story was no longer just about a missing woman. It was about a powerful man who seemed to hover at the edges of every clue, every inconsistency, every shadow. Even the police, when pressed, admitted the case was unusual. But when asked directly if Mark was a suspect, they dodged the question. "We are exploring all avenues," was their vague reply. To Anna's father, the evasion was unbearable. He stood on the courthouse steps and declared, "Mark Jensen knows what happened to my daughter. And if the police won't hold him accountable, the people will." Crowds erupted in applause. Online forums lit up. The pressure was mounting. And then, almost as if in response, something shocking happened. Another piece of Anna's belongings was found. A hiker stumbled upon a torn scrap of fabric lodged in a tree branch near Mount Hood. It matched the shirt Anna had been wearing that day. But the fabric wasn't weathered. It wasn't old. It looked freshly torn, as though it had only recently been placed there. And with it came a chilling realization: someone was moving her belongings around, piece by piece, as if to taunt investigators. Who would do that? The answer seemed obvious to many: the man in the shadows. Mark Jensen. But if he was truly orchestrating this, the more terrifying question remained: was he covering up a crime? Or was Anna still alive, hidden away, and being used as leverage in a dangerous game no one fully understood? The boot had haunted everyone from the moment it was found. Worn but sturdy, mud-stained but intact, it seemed almost too convenient when searchers stumbled upon it days after combing the very same area. But the detail that truly gripped the public was what lay inside: blood, and a note. The blood was the first puzzle. At first, police said it was Anna's. That much was confirmed. But there was something else: traces of male DNA, partial and degraded. The lab refused to comment further, citing privacy of the investigation, but whispers leaked anyway. It wasn't Mark Jensen's. At least, not a full match. Some suggested it might belong to someone close to him, a relative, a business partner, or perhaps someone on his payroll. Then came the note. Crumpled, damp, and half-smudged, but still legible. "It's not safe. He has eyes everywhere." The words were maddeningly vague. To Anna's family, it was confirmation that she was terrified in her final hours. To the public, it was proof that she had been hunted. And to the online sleuths who dissected every letter, every smear of ink, it was a breadcrumb trail, leading straight back to the man in the shadows. Mark Jensen. But if Anna had written the note, how had it ended up in her boot? And why had the boot been placed in such a visible, almost theatrical way, days after the first search had cleared the area? To many, the answer was chilling: the boot wasn't evidence. It was a message. One theory was that Anna herself had left it behind, a desperate act of resistance. Maybe she knew she was being followed, maybe she had written the note in a moment of fear, and then stuffed it into her boot hoping someone would find it. A signal, a clue. But the timing didn't fit. The boot had appeared too late, in too neat a place, as though someone wanted it found. That led to a darker theory: the boot had been staged. If true, then who staged it? And for what purpose? Some said it was Anna's abductor, to taunt the police. Others said it was someone inside the investigation, planting evidence to distract from the truth. But the most scandalous theory was also the one that gained the most traction. Mark Jensen himself had arranged for the boot to be discovered, a twisted warning to anyone prying into his affairs. One YouTube commentator put it bluntly: the boot wasn't a clue. It was a calling card. His way of saying, I control the narrative. The controversy exploded when a local reporter dug deeper into the DNA. According to a leaked internal memo, the male DNA was a probable familial match to someone already in the state's offender database. The name was redacted, but speculation ran wild. Could it have been a distant relative of Mark's? His estranged younger brother, known for gambling debts and violent outbursts? Or maybe one of his bodyguards, men who never appeared in photographs but always lingered nearby at his events? The timing of the leak couldn't have been worse for Mark. His business empire was already under scrutiny, his public image crumbling. And now, the boot, a single piece of leather and laces, was dragging him deeper into a nightmare he couldn't charm his way out of. But the real scandal came not from the boot itself, but from what it revealed about the investigation. In a late-night interview, an anonymous police insider claimed the note had been sanitized before being shown to the press. There were more words, the source insisted. The full note was longer. It named someone. And that part was redacted. If true, that meant authorities weren't just failing Anna, they were actively covering up her attempt to identify her tormentor. When that rumor broke, outrage erupted. Hashtags like #ShowTheNote and #JusticeForAnna trended across social media. Protesters gathered outside the police department demanding transparency. Theories swirled like wildfire. Who was being protected? Why was Anna's voice being silenced, even in her absence? David White, her father, delivered a fiery speech at one of the rallies. Holding up a photograph of Anna, he shouted. They found her boot, her blood, her words. And instead of following them, they buried them. My daughter tried to tell us who did this. And the people in power don't want us to know. The crowd roared. It was no longer just a missing person case, it was a fight against corruption. And then, as if fate itself wanted to stoke the fire, a second note surfaced. A local hiker, one of the many amateurs searching the gorge after officials had pulled out, claimed he found it tucked inside the hollow of a tree. Crumpled and faded, but unmistakably written in the same hand as the boot's note, it read, "If you're reading this, I'm still alive. Don't trust him." The discovery split the case wide open. Was Anna alive, hidden somewhere, desperately trying to send signals to the outside world? Or was someone deliberately planting notes to manipulate public opinion, feeding a narrative for their own gain? Police were quick to dismiss the second note, calling it unverified and suggesting it was a hoax. But the handwriting analysis leaked days later suggested otherwise. The loops, the pressure, the jagged style all matched Anna's journals. The implications were staggering. If Anna was still alive, then every wasted day, every ignored clue, every redacted word was another failure of justice. And if she wasn't alive, if the note had been planted posthumously, then it was something far more sinister, psychological warfare. In either case, the boot and the notes it contained had done their job. They had shaken the city, inflamed the public, and turned Anna White's disappearance into the most controversial case Portland had seen in decades. But the real twist was yet to come. Because while the world debated whether Anna was alive or dead, whether Mark Jensen was guilty or framed, a new piece of evidence was about to emerge, one that would make everything that came before look tame. A video. A shaky, handheld video, uploaded anonymously online. And in that video, the man in the shadows was no longer hiding. It began on a rainy Wednesday night, when most of Portland was settling into its usual rhythm, commuters trapped in traffic, diners lingering over cocktails, students crowding into coffee shops. Then, at exactly 9:47 p.m., a shaky video appeared online under an anonymous account simply titled Shadow Witness 77. The video was grainy, filmed on what seemed to be an old phone camera. But despite the poor quality, there was no mistaking the setting, a cabin tucked deep in the forest. A lantern burned in the background, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. And there was Anna. At least, that's what everyone believed. The woman in the video looked exhausted, her face pale, her hair disheveled. She sat on a chair, hands bound, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Her eyes darted toward the camera, then away, as if someone just outside the frame was watching her. And then came the voice. Low, commanding, unmistakable. "You think anyone will believe you," the man said. The camera shifted slightly, catching just the edge of a figure, broad-shouldered, in a dark jacket. His face never appeared fully, but for those who had followed the case, the profile, the cadence, the very tone of that voice was enough. It was Mark Jensen. The video was less than 2 minutes long, but it detonated like a bomb. Within hours, it had been downloaded, shared, and mirrored across every platform imaginable. News stations played it on repeat. Commentators dissected every frame, comparing the voice to old interviews, overlaying the silhouette with photographs of Mark. The public reaction was ferocious. Protesters marched outside Mark's mansion, chanting, "Where is Anna?" Conspiracy forums exploded with theories. Was the video real, or was it a deepfake? Some insisted the woman wasn't Anna at all, just someone who looked like her. Others swore it was proof, the smoking gun, that Mark had held her captive. Mark himself responded quickly, but not convincingly. Standing on the steps of his office building, he declared the video a fabrication, a malicious attempt to destroy my reputation. He claimed it was digitally altered, an attack from people who fear my success. But his explanation fell flat. Experts brought in by media outlets said the footage showed no obvious signs of manipulation. The voice, when analyzed, matched Mark's with a 92% likelihood. And while the video was old and shaky, one chilling detail stood out: the woman's boot. On her foot, half visible in the shadows, was the very same style of hiking boot that had been discovered in the gorge. This detail alone sent shivers down spines. If the boot had been staged evidence, as many suspected, then the video suggested it was staged after Anna had been filmed, meaning someone had deliberately taken her belongings from that cabin and planted them miles away to mislead the search. For Anna's family, the video was devastating. Her mother collapsed when she saw it, whispering, "That's her. That's my baby." Her father demanded immediate arrests, screaming at cameras, "How much more do you need? They're covering for him. They're covering for all of them." But the authorities hesitated. The Portland Police Department issued a cautious statement: "We are aware of the video circulating online. We cannot verify its authenticity at this time." That hesitation only fueled suspicion. Why weren't they moving faster? Why weren't they storming Mark's properties, searching his lands, interrogating his employees? To the public, the answer was obvious: corruption. Mark had his claws too deep into City Hall, the police department, maybe even the courts. Still, pressure was mounting. Within days, the governor herself was forced to step in, announcing that the Oregon State Police and the FBI would assist with the case. It was an unprecedented escalation, and one Mark could no longer brush off with charm and denial. Meanwhile, amateur detectives online uncovered even more chilling details from the video. One frame showed a newspaper on a nearby table, its date partially visible. Enhancing the image suggested it was from 2 weeks after Anna disappeared. If true, it proved she had been alive long after the official search had ended. Another discovery was even more scandalous. A tattoo. On the wrist of the man who briefly reached into the frame to adjust the camera. It was small, barely visible, but clear enough, an interlocking triangle pattern. The same tattoo worn by several men known to work as security for Mark Jensen's real estate company. The internet lost its mind. Mark's empire, once untouchable, was now unraveling in real time. Tenants in his properties refused to pay rent, staging protests. Investors pulled out. Politicians who once boasted of his donations suddenly denied ever knowing him. But perhaps the most shocking fallout came from inside Mark's own home. His wife, Carol, who had been silent for years, suddenly broke her silence in an explosive television interview. Sitting rigid, her voice trembling, she admitted, "I told Anna to stay away from him. I warned her. I said he would ruin her life. But she didn't listen. And now, she broke into tears, now she's gone." The interview sent shockwaves across the country. Why would Carol say that publicly unless she knew something? Some took it as a confession of guilt, proof that she had always known her husband was capable of violence. Others wondered if she herself had played a role. After all, wasn't it convenient that she was now painting herself as the victim? Scandal upon scandal piled on. And then, almost as if orchestrated by fate, the anonymous account Shadow Witness 77 posted again. Not another video. Just a message. 3 words. "She's still alive." The timing, the wording, the mystery, it was too much for the public to ignore. If the first video was a spark, this message was gasoline on the fire. And now, the hunt for Anna White wasn't just about finding her body. It was about proving she was still alive. The video had been gasoline. The anonymous message, "She's still alive," was the match. Portland became unrecognizable almost overnight. What had once been a city of rain-drenched coffee shops and quiet bookstores now pulsed with hysteria. Flyers with Anna's face papered telephone poles and storefronts. Murals appeared on brick walls, depicting her with angelic wings, the words, "Bring her home," scrawled beneath. Candlelight vigils filled city parks every night. But beneath the grief was a fever, a restless, insatiable need to know. Everywhere, people were searching. Not just the police. Not just the FBI. Ordinary citizens packed backpacks with flashlights and ropes, heading out into the gorge and Mount Hood trails as though hunting for treasure. Armchair detectives flew in from out of state, live-streaming their own amateur expeditions. Social media lit up with hashtags like #FindAnna and #BootClue, drawing in millions who demanded answers. And then came the vigilantes. They weren't subtle. Camouflage jackets, military-grade gear, some even carrying weapons. They claimed the government was too slow, too compromised, too weak to act. "We'll bring Anna back," they promised in YouTube videos viewed by tens of thousands. "And if Jensen thinks he's untouchable, we'll prove him wrong." Tensions exploded when one of these groups broke into one of Mark Jensen's remote properties, a hunting lodge in the foothills of Mount Hood. They streamed the raid live, breathlessly narrating every creak of the wooden floors, every empty room. And then, in the cellar, they found something. A chair. Stained ropes. And scratched into the wooden beam nearby, a single word. "Run." The footage went viral instantly. For millions, it was proof. Anna had been there. She had tried to leave a message, just like the note in her boot. Police rushed to the lodge within hours, cordoning off the area and angrily denouncing the vigilantes for tampering with a crime scene. But the damage was done. The frenzy had reached boiling point. Mark Jensen, now besieged on all sides, doubled down on his defense. In a televised interview, he sneered at the accusations. "This is mob justice. None of you know the facts. My family is being harassed, my business is under attack, and for what? A shaky video and graffiti in the woods." But the more he denied, the more people dug. Investigative reporters unearthed his ties to private contractors, men who weren't just security, but former military with questionable pasts. Bloggers traced his donations to city officials, exposing patterns of influence that made the corruption claims all the more believable. And then came the twist that shocked even Anna's supporters. One of the vigilante searchers, a young man named Ryan, who had been streaming his hunts in the gorge, disappeared. His last video cut off abruptly after he claimed to have found fresh tracks leading into a ravine. When his friends retraced the path the next morning, they found his backpack. Torn, slashed open. Inside, smeared across the fabric, was blood. And wedged into the side pocket, almost deliberately placed, was something else. A second boot. Not Anna's this time. Ryan's. The implication was chilling. Whoever had taken Anna was now watching the searchers, punishing those who came too close. The city erupted in panic. Commentators screamed that this was no longer just about Anna. Portland itself was under siege. Some whispered that Mark Jensen had unleashed men to clean up anyone who threatened him. Others swore this was proof of something bigger, a network, a ring, a system of power that had swallowed Anna and was now swallowing anyone who got too curious. The FBI tried to calm the chaos, urging people to leave the investigation to professionals. But no one trusted them anymore. Not when notes had been redacted. Not when evidence had been staged. Not when the boot itself had been manipulated. Anna's father, David, fanned the flames further. Standing on the steps of City Hall, he shouted to a crowd of hundreds. "They killed Ryan because he got close. Don't let them scare you. Keep searching. Keep fighting. If we stop, Anna dies in the dark." His words electrified the movement. Far from backing down, more search parties poured into the mountains. Helicopters were hired by private donors to sweep the gorge. Drones buzzed the skies like angry hornets. But amidst the chaos, one detail slipped almost unnoticed. A local woman, hiking alone near Eagle Creek, reported something strange, a small camera, hidden inside the trunk of a tree, its lens pointed toward the trail. She turned it into authorities. Days later, word leaked that it wasn't the only one. There were dozens. Cameras scattered across the gorge, buried, hidden, camouflaged. Watching. Recording. But who had put them there? Some insisted it was the police's secret surveillance, now uncovered. Others claimed it was Mark, keeping tabs on those hunting for Anna. The darkest theory, though, was the most unsettling, that the cameras weren't new at all. That they had been there long before Anna disappeared. And that Anna had never walked into the wilderness alone. The frenzy had reached its breaking point. Portland was no longer asking what happened to Anna White. It was asking, how deep does this go? The tension in Portland had reached a fever pitch. By the time the 10th week rolled around, the entire city, and much of the nation, was watching. News helicopters hovered above Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge like predators circling prey. Social media feeds were flooded with theories, accusations, and pleas for answers. But the real revelation came quietly, almost accidentally. It began with the cameras hidden in the trees, the ones discovered by the lone hiker weeks before. Investigators finally recovered the memory cards and began analyzing them. What they found was astonishing. Footage showed Anna, yes, but not as a lost hiker wandering aimlessly. She was being followed, observed, sometimes approached by someone wearing a black jacket. She looked terrified, speaking into a small, handheld device like she was leaving messages. And then, suddenly, the footage captured something impossible: Mark Jensen himself, entering the gorge trails under the cover of early morning fog, followed by several men. They were moving with purpose, avoiding the main paths, carrying backpacks. The pieces fell into place. Anna had discovered something, evidence of illegal activity tied to Mark's empire. The journals, the notes, the hints of threats, all pointed to a double life she had stumbled upon. The boot? Planted as a warning. The first video? A display of power, a psychological game. And the surveillance? A system designed not just to watch, but to control. Authorities, now under federal oversight, moved quickly. They raided properties linked to Mark, uncovering hidden rooms, locked sheds, and what investigators later described as a small network for containment and intimidation. And then came the most shocking discovery. Anna was alive. Huddled in a concealed cabin on the outskirts of one of Mark's properties, she had survived by keeping silent, by avoiding attention, by leaving subtle clues, like the note in the boot, hoping someone would find her. Her survival was a combination of luck, resourcefulness, and sheer courage. When news broke, Portland erupted. Families wept in the streets. Protesters celebrated. Journalists rushed to get her story. And Mark Jensen? He was taken into custody, facing multiple charges: unlawful confinement, intimidation, obstruction of justice, and more. But the scandal didn't stop there. Investigators uncovered that Mark had used city resources and influence to manipulate the original search for Anna. Officers had been instructed to avoid certain areas, ensuring she remained hidden, and the planted boot had been his way of sending a public message: I am in control. Even more explosive were the revelations about the network of men who assisted him: security contractors, family members, and even city officials who had quietly covered his tracks. The scandal rocked Portland politics, and nationwide outrage demanded justice. Anna, for her part, emerged cautiously. Weakened but determined, she spoke publicly for the first time in months. I survived because I had to. Because I knew if I stayed silent, they would win. But now, I want the truth out. People need to know what really happened. And I want to make sure no one else disappears into the shadows like I did. Her story sparked a wave of reform. The Portland Police Department launched internal investigations. Policies were changed. And for the first time in weeks, the public felt a semblance of closure, though the scars of fear, scandal, and corruption would linger. The boot, once a symbol of mystery, now became a symbol of resilience. The note it contained, the blood it bore, the male DNA, all pointed not just to danger, but to survival, and to the lengths a powerful man would go to hide the truth. And for Anna White, the woman who had walked into the wilderness and never returned, the revelation was simple: survival wasn't just about leaving the forest alive. It was about outsmarting those who tried to control her, exposing their lies, and reclaiming her life in the light of day. Portland would never forget the scandal. The nation would follow her story for months. And Anna herself, now safe, but forever changed, would always remember the boot that held the first clue, the note that whispered the truth, and the wilderness that tested her in ways no one could imagine. In the end, the wilderness had not claimed her. She had walked in, faced shadows, and walked back into the world stronger, smarter, and unbroken. The mystery was solved, the scandal exposed, and the truth finally told.